Hey, Originals listeners, are you ready for a thrill ride? Actually, to tell you the truth, ever since I hit 40, I haven't been able to go on roller coasters. I think it's something that just happens when you get older. The old inner ear rebels as you age, and I puke. So I took my kids to the Air and Space Museum about 5 years ago, and my older boy, Henry, wanted to do the flight simulator with me, and he was totally into making our F-14 Phantom do like 5 solid minutes of barrel rolls. Now, at the end of the ride, there's one of those things where you can buy a picture of yourself mid-flight. So I see this, and I am literally Kermit Green in mine. And I have this picture somewhere of my beaming 8-year-old son, Henry, strapped next to this decrepit old man, who you can tell is like 3.5 minutes from hurling his chilaquiles in the nearest bathroom. I'm going to see if I can find it and drop it into the show notes. Anyway, the closest I can now get to experiencing the kind of thrills, surprises, violent turns of a roller coaster is the sensation I got spending a couple hours conversing with today's guest, big-time Hollywood producer Howard Rosenman. I really don't want to tell you too much about Howard, but if you do a Google image search of him, you're going to find pictures of him posing with Liz Taylor, Dakota Johnson, Brett Ratner, David Geffen, Diane von Furstenberg, Julianne Moore, and a variety of studio heads. Howard just knows everyone. I'll just give you a few highlights of his resume. Howard produced movies such as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the Steve Martin, Diane Keaton remake of Father of the Bride, Barbra Streisand and Ryan O'Neal's boxing comedy, The Main Event, and more recently, the movie that made Timothée Chalamet and Armie Hammer stars, 2017's Call Me By Your Name. He also happens to be the king of gay documentaries, having produced The Celluloid Closet and Common Threads, Stories from the Quilt. And at 77, Howard continues to work, unfelled by any Me Too or even cannibalism scandals. At various times in his career, Howard's run the film divisions for impresario Robert Stigwood, he of Bee Gees and Saturday Night Fever fame, Burlstein Gray, and even for a minute, Michael Jackson. And even though he's long denied membership, or even the very existence of a Velvet Mafia, but honestly, isn't the first rule of any mafia you gotta deny it exists? Were such a thing to be real, Howard would certainly be a made guy. As you'll hear, he got a start in Hollywood alongside future blockbuster director Joel Schumacher, producing 1976's Sparkle, the idea for which he and Schumacher conceived together. And this interview, I think, is a really nice compliment to the 2019 Vulture interview I did with Joel a year before his death, and I'm going to include that in the link in the show notes. So fasten your seatbelts, keep your hands and feet, as well as any other flappy appendages, inside the car during the duration of this ride. This is The Originals, and I'm your host, Andrew Goldman. I spent decades interviewing celebrities for magazines, the vast majority of whom were just there to sell something, shared very little of themselves. So I created The Originals to interview cultural figures who actually had something to say, wanted to express something real. Given that, how in hell did it take us this long to have Howard Rosenman on this show? Howard Rosenman, welcome to The Originals.
Thank you. Nice to see you, Andrew.
I know that you were born in Brownsville, Brooklyn. And I have to admit, I lived in Manhattan for many, many years, and I lived fairly close to there. I've never been to Brownsville. I did look up, and I looked up for famous residents. And apart from you, we have Al Sharpton, Mike Tyson, Five-ish Finkel, Zero Mostel, and the gangster Henry Hill. And so I tried to put that together, and I thought it was an interesting history. Is that indicative of the kind of place that you grew up? Blacks next to Jews, next to gangsters?
Yes, it does. It was a very Jewish neighborhood when I was born, very close neighborhood. My parents lived on one end, my grandparents lived on the other. My father's store was next to my grandfather's store, who was a furrier. My aunt lived across the street. My cousins lived across the street. And in the summer, they took out their lawn chairs and sat on the street, like on the beach. And it was very close like that. But there were a lot of gangsters, not only Henry Hill, but many of the toughest gangsters in New York came from there. Many.
And your family are Orthodox, correct? They're Orthodox Jews.
Modern Orthodox. But my parents were both born in Jerusalem. They came to America, and essentially they were brought up what today would be called modern Orthodox. Because they were Israeli, they had that Israeli thing going on.
Well, I know that you went to med school, so probably that is the dream of a Jewish modern Orthodox mother. And it sounds like initially you were the dream son, right?
Well, I wasn't the dream son because, my parents knew I was gay when I was 4.
Wait, okay, so that's what I want to. When you were 4, how did they know you were gay?
My uncle, Nat Maidenbaum, who came from Poland in the 20s, I think, and pushed a pushcart. He turned that pushcart into the most successful. He stocked all the groceries on the East Coast. It was called Met Foods, which later became Associated, a company that's now worth $500-600 million. And they had money. My father's sister was married to him, my Aunt Esther. So my Uncle Nat founded a yeshiva in Brooklyn in 1949. It was called the Bialik School. And the Bialik School was founded so that his nieces and nephews and his children, he had 6 of them, could study the values of America and secular education, as well as being inculcated in the Zionist ethos. So, it was speaking Hebrew and learning about Israel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? When I was 4 in 1949, I went to this yeshiva. The teacher gave everybody clay, and everybody made clay pots. But little Tzvi Howard Rosenman, my real name is Tzvi, by the way, Hebrew. We all had Hebrew names. Tzvi didn't make a pot. Guess what Tzvi made?
Oh, I don't want to guess. Well,
okay, I'm not going to say it.
Did you make a dick?
I made a dick with a head on it and a vein running down the middle. And the teacher sent me to the school psychologist. And the school psychologist wrote a letter to my parents and my aunt and uncle. And I'll tell you what it said in a minute. But when my mother had a nervous breakdown every time she had one of us. There were 3 of us. I have a sister who's ultra-Orthodox who lives in Jerusalem. And I have a brother who's 19 years younger than me, who's a very successful entertainment lawyer. He sold The Walking Dead to AMC. He was very, very successful. And he's my lawyer. At any rate, so my mother, every time she had one of us, she had what was then called a nervous breakdown. Today it's called PPD, postpartum depression. So the first year of our lives, she kind of wasn't present in a certain, in a lot of ways, physically, affectionate-wise. My father took over that role. And my father was very affectionate to me until I was 4. When he got the letter, he changed gigantically and started to be really tough with me, pushing me out to play sports, kind of beating me up when I didn't perform. And it turned me into a very tough guy because instead of falling into it, I fell out of it. My father would say, do this, and I would say, no, fuck you. I'm not going to do that. No. Later on, I thanked him because he turned me into a producer. I developed a very thick skin, and I was able to accept a lot of rejection based on my father's bullying and the bullying of the kids in my class and in my bunks in camp. At any rate, so the letter, my mother got sick. She was in the hospital, 2001. I had just made Family Man, and they were on the set of Family Man in New York. And my mother's in the hospital, and she says like this, come here. Get me my pocketbook. I got her the pocketbook. She said, there's a letter in there. Take it out. And I took out the letter, and it was very yellowed. And it was a letter from the school psychologist. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Rosenman, your brilliant young son, Tzvi, is in the throes of a homosexual crisis. It's incumbent upon you to send him to a psychiatrist or a psychoanalyst to determine whether he has enough heterosexual fabric to make a heterosexual adjustment or whether he's truly homosexual. Yours truly. In other words, he was saying to my parents, check it out, because if he's gay, you've got to live with it. My father took it the other way. He didn't want a fagler for a son. He wanted a guy who's an athlete.
Yeah.
And it changed the way my father looked at me. But when I got the letter, my mother said to me, "Read the letter and you'll understand everything," which I did.
Wait, you hadn't heard until the year 2000 that this letter existed?
No.
Then you went back and like realized why your father behaved the way he did? You only recognized this when you were producing this Nicolas Cage movie after you'd produced all these other movies, that this is what happened?
Yes.
Are you sure, Howard, that this is what happened?
Very sure.
Really? And did you ask them about it? Did you say, "Is that why, Dad, you were so affectionate and then you became a prick?"
Kind of.
And did he acknowledge it?
Yes, he told my sister that he realizes that he was too tough on me. I made up with my father in 1983. We had a tough relationship until 1983. And then I got sober and I said to my father, "Listen, when I walk into a room, the room lights up. Everybody loves me. You're the only one that doesn't love me." And I have friends, mostly your age. So we could be friends if you stay away from sex and religion. They didn't know boundaries. I had to create boundaries for my parents.
Yeah. How close did you get? I mean, apart from them at 4 realizing that you were gay, how much talk of sex did you ever like reference boyfriends or sex that you had? Did they have any idea what your social life was like?
Well, in around 1987, we were in shul on Yom Kippur. My father says to me, "Your mother is the only one I've ever loved. I'm in love with her after all these years. Tell me," he says, "how many people have you been with?" I said, "Abba," Hebrew for father. "You agreed not to talk to me about all this." But he was relentless, knew no boundaries, and pushed and pushed and pushed. And finally, I blurted out 10,000. And he said to me, "Why must you exaggerate everything you always tell me?" And I said, "I cut it in half in order not to embarrass you."
Howard, do you know that I did an interview? I think it was maybe the final interview that he did in 2019 with Joel Schumacher. Who?
Oh my God! Really? You did an interview with Joel?
Yeah, for New York Magazine, for Vulture.
Wow! I started Joel's career.
I know, but we're going to talk about Joel. But Joel, I was very fond of Joel. And I was very surprised, actually, when Joel died, because in 2019, he seemed like he was in fantastic
shape. He didn't
shape.
tell anybody. I'll tell you about it. But Joel knew my parents very well, because I brought Joel to my brother's bar mitzvah in Israel. And he was very close to my mother and father.
So I'm sitting with Joel, and one of Joel's lines, and I try to do a lot of research before I do things, is that Joel always said I was overpaid and oversexed in Hollywood. And I said, "Joel, can we get down to numbers? I mean, what does this actually mean, oversexed? What are we talking about?" Let me play that bit of the interview. I actually have it right here. Have you ever guesstimated the number of partners you had?
It would be in the double-digit thousands. But that is not unusual.
Double-digit thousands, so 20, 30, 40.
No, I would guess. I don't know. It's very hard.
Wait, but when you say double-digit thousands, is that 2,000 or?
That's not double digits.
So
that's
10?
Single digit.
Oh, that's single digit. So 20 or 30 or somewhere in there.
Or 10.
Or 10.
Or 20.
That's really amazing.
It's not. It's not for a gay male. Because it's available.
Right. Does it seem naive for me to even...
It's not, a male culture is not a great no culture.
Right. And I thought to myself, when did you have time to make all these movies? And it made headlines. And the funny thing was, straight people of my age, it became like a big headline and it went everywhere. And I think a lot of gay people were like, yeah, that's kind of, yes, that's a big number, but not inconceivable. This is not...
You have to understand, and straight people don't understand this at all. But the generation that Joel is older than me by about 5 or 6 years, I think. But we grew up in the same generation, essentially. A generation that was liberated in 1969. And then you would go to the baths and you would have sex with 20 people a night. I'm not saying intercourse. I'm saying sex. Blowjobs, jerk it, whatever. you would have 20 people a night. Okay. And then during the day, you would walk on the street across 57th Street in Manhattan, and you would see somebody who would look at you and you would take him home. And then you would go back and continue walking on 57th Street and pick up somebody else. It was constant. Okay. Sex was constant. And if you were like me and Joel, I was brought up in a repressed background. So when 1969 came around, the gay revolution, Stonewall, it was like, whoa, this is incredible. And both Joel and I, we were both good looking, and it was easy. It was easy to have sex. We went to Fire Island. We would go to the meat rack, and we would have 30 people a night. It was like that.
The meat rack. Tell me about the meat rack.
In between Fire Island Pines and Cherry Grove, there's like a forest where people would go to have sex.
Meat rack. But there's no actual literal rack.
There's no rack. There was a lot of trees.
rack. But let me get this. I just want to I want to break this down a little bit because I've heard all about the baths. So 20 people. I've had some sex in my life. I remember basically beating myself raw to the Love Boat and Fantasy Island when I was a kid. As a kid, I can remember beating myself raw would be 5 ejaculations. For 20 people, are we not talking 20? We're not talking 20 ejaculations.
We're not talking 20 ejaculations. We're talking about having sex.
So when does it stop? Okay, but why do you decide if you're having sex with somebody? Why do you decide to stop?
You get bored.
Oh, that's enough.
You get bored. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
You get bored, or the sex is vanilla, or whatever. There are 100 reasons, 1,000 reasons. You know.
And Joel actually spoke to me about, he would shoot speed for years.
Yes.
He had these Fire Island days where he was roaming around Fire Island in nothing but a Speedo. And he said, you just can't understand. You want to have sex constantly. Constantly. Did you have, I know you had a drug period. Was your drug period similar to Joel's?
No, I didn't shoot speed. Although I took a lot of drugs. During, when I came out to Hollywood. I came out to Hollywood in 1973. So from 1973 to 1979, 1980, we would party. I mean, there were a group of about 50 of us that came from New York. Paul Schrader, Richard Gere, Michelle Rappaport, Nando Scarfiotti, Bruce Weintraub, Dyson Lovell, a whole bunch of people. And at the beginning, we would split 1 gram of Coke for the whole weekend. And by the time 1979 rolled around, we would be splitting 3 ounces of Coke.
Holy shit.
So, yeah.
I was just thinking 1 gram is not enough for all those people.
No.
3 ounces is way too fucking much, though.
No. Well, it's 90 grams.
Yeah. And so did at some point you realize, I noticed when I was looking at your IMDb page, there was a period, there are periods when you didn't work as much.
Right. That was one of the periods.
Cocaine
and speed. And I was addicted to 21 different substances by the time my game was out. Okay.
What do you mean by your game was out?
By the time I gave it up.
Yeah.
I gave it up January. I'll tell you exactly when I gave it up. January 19th of 1983 is when I gave it up. On January 18th of 1983, Berry Gordy threw a big party for Michael Black, who was our agent, a birthday party. And Barry Berenson, who married Tony Perkins, was one of my Coke buddies. She was part of that group. And then I heard that Tony and Barry were having problems. And they were going to get a divorce.
Well, Tony was gay, right?
Well, he was married and had kids.
But I thought okay, anyway, go ahead.
If you ask me about anybody is gay, this is what I'll answer you. As Tallulah Bankhead said, when she was asked if Tennessee Williams was gay, she said, I don't know, he never sucked my cock.
Okay, so I've heard you actually have a really sort of amazing roster of people, both famous and not famous, that you've had sex with. So I'm going to assume Tony Perkins was not one of them.
I didn't have sex with Tony Perkins. He became a friend of mine, thank God.
Okay, so Barry Berenson, who died in 9/11, right? It was Barry Berenson, right?
Yeah.
Died in one of the planes.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt, please.
Marissa Berenson's sister.
Right.
Who was a good friend of mine. Anyway, she was my Coke buddy, and I lost touch with her from September 1982 till I saw her on January 18th of 1983. And she walked into the party and she's holding hands with Tony. And she was gorgeous, big blue eyes, fantastic, fresh-looking girl. And they're holding hands. And she used to call me, "What you got?" Because every time I would meet you, I would say at a party, "What you got?" And she would give me what she had, and I would give her what I had, okay? And there were a lot of drugs exchanged in those days, okay? Escatrol, Desputol, ecstasy, marijuana, crystal meth, coke, a lot of drugs, okay?
Right.
So I go over to her and I say, "What you got?" at this party.
Right.
And she looks at me and she says, "I've been sober 3 months." And I try to get sober about 2 or 3 times during that period, like 1981, 82. And I couldn't get sober. You'd go through a tremendous withdrawal and I couldn't get sober. It was a nightmare. It was indeed a nightmare. And I said to Barry, "What do you mean? How'd you get sober?" She said, "I went to this guy named Ron Siegel at UCLA. I said, give me his number." And she said, "Well, he only takes people that take from 3 to 6 ounces of cocaine a week." At my height, I was taking maybe 20, 25 grams, and it was a lot of coke.
Yeah.
An ounce, as I said, is 36 grams, did I say?
Did she say 3 to 6 ounces a week?
Yeah. And
personally?
That's people who shoot and freebase.
Okay.
Okay.
Because it's a bigger volume you need. I've never done for shot or freebase. You need more to shoot and free.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So I said, "You got to give me the number." And she gave me the number. And I went to him, Ron Siegel. Little guy, he just died this year. Glasses. And he was funded by the National Institutes of Mental Health, NIMH, his programs. And he did all his original research on cocaine on Jane Goodall's monkeys, she gave him her monkeys. And he did a lot of research on the monkeys.
Jane? Okay. It seems scandalous to me. Jane Goodall gave him her chimps?
Yeah. I don't know if she knew that they were being experimented on like that. Who knows? And who knows if Jane Goodall gave him the monkeys? That's what he told me.
Okay. Somewhere he got monkeys.
At any rate, he said to me, "I can't take you. You don't fit my protocol. I only take people that take from 3 to 6 ounces a week." And he said, "Well, tell me what else you take." And when I got to 21, he said to me, "You're in a lot of trouble. But I could help you. You could fit on another protocol that I'm doing." And he took me on his program. And his program was very, very involved. And not 12-step, but more Pavlovian than anything else. And that program got me sober. Totally sober.
Pavlovian. So was it negative reinforcement? Positive?
Yes, negative reinforcement, a lot.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, it was extreme. Well, he was always called by either defense or prosecution to testify about cocaine-related murders or deaths. And he did a lot of research, not only on the monkeys, but he had a lot of vast files, murder files. One of the files that he had was this woman that took cocaine just on the weekends. It's so hard to explain because I have to go into the whole thing. But the bottom line is, at the end of the program, he shows you a picture of this woman who just took cocaine on the weekends. And it's Sunday night and it's dark and the door opens. And cocaine ophthalmologically heightens your sight. It's used ophthalmologically for that.
Okay? I didn't realize that.
So the door opens up. She's kindled. You know what kindling is? You take enough cocaine, it's like a fire of logs. And when the fire burns out, the logs are kindled. If you throw in a match, the whole fireplace will conflagrate. If you stop taking cocaine, let's say, for 5 days, and you're in a kindled state, and it takes weeks to get kindled, if you take a toot of cocaine, your whole brain conflagrates, and you go to that higher state. It's the states of nirvana, all those various states. It's the same thing, okay, essentially.
You're making this sound actually sort of appealing.
It's not appealing.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
Because you're hooked on it, and you become paranoid, and you become aggressive, and you become vicious, and you don't know bounds, and it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
And you're hungry for it. It's a nightmare. Yeah. It's the worst nightmare ever.
Well, let me ask you this, Howard. But
I'm not finished.
Oh, okay. Please go ahead.
So this woman, the door opens, the light comes in. She's hearing the crunching of the thing. She's paranoid. She takes a knife and she goes like that, and she cuts off her son's head. And he shows you the picture of the head dangling by a piece of skin. That's what he shows you. He lets you listen on earphones in those days to hookers who were picked up on Sunset Boulevard on Sunday morning, brought home by sadists, okay, who would take a plier to their tits and to their vaginas, to their clitorises, and pull them out, and you would be listening to their screams. Now, is that heavenly to you? Does that sound fun to you?
You've changed, Howard. You changed my mind. Just the one thing, the kindling of like the word nirvana sounded appealing, but the pulling off of the nipples.
Right. I was trying to tell you that the same states that you reach in TM or whatever it is, whatever thing you use to get to a higher state, it's the same thing that happens in the brain.
Where did he get that shit? Where did he get those recording? So you saw like images of this?
Because he was a witness. He was a defense witness. So he got a lot of
Okay.
It was a 90-day program. He got me sober.
Oh.
Later on, with David Geffen and Carrie Fisher, I started going to the 12-step rooms. But I would go to listen to the stories of survival, and I found them inspiring. But I never did the 12 steps. Yeah. It's not my thing.
Joel told me a lot about how certain he was that he was going to die of AIDS. I actually have. Let me play a little clip.
One of my friends who was not promiscuous was the first person I knew that had it. But he was not promiscuous. And I was extremely promiscuous. So I thought, well, if he has it, I must have it quadrupled. And I went to get tested. I was sure I had it. I was planning my death.
Howard, you were just as promiscuous as Joel. Did you imagine it was going to kill you too?
In 1983, after I got sober, I had a spot over here, a blue spot.
On your hand?
Yes, in between my finger and my thumb. And I had this syndrome where I would faint, have diarrhea, and I would sweat. And I went to my doctor, Ashley Lipschitz, and I showed him the blue spot, and he knew about the syndrome. And he said, okay, you've got AIDS. Now, there was no test in 1984. I tell you that for a reason. At any rate, so the doctor literally looks me in the eye and says, you've got Kaposi sarcoma. You've got AIDS. Fix up your affairs. 6 months, it's over. And find a place where you could stay, that someone will take care of you. He said that to me, to my face, without blinking. So I left. I sold a lot of stuff. I moved to Israel to be with my sister in Tel Aviv. And I didn't tell my sister what was going on. But I never got really, really sick. And the blue spot disappeared. I still had the sweating, and I still had the diarrhea, and I still had the fainting. So I went to a doctor in Tel Aviv. And by 1984, they knew already that it was a virus. And the doctor in Tel Aviv says to me, if you have the virus, it's a very attenuated form, because the hallmark of the disease are the opportunistic infections. Kaposi sarcoma, pneumocystis carinii, idiopathic thrombocytopenic purpura, lymphoma. You're not getting any of those. So you don't have that. Go back to Hollywood and make movies. You're not going to die from that. You're going to die from your diabetes first. I did go back to Hollywood, but at the very beginning when I came back, I had no money because I blew all my money on drugs and all that shit and the grandiosity of it all. And come to Paris with me for the weekend. All that bullshit. Yeah. And so I had a friend named Chris Adler, who was the son of Richard Adler, who wrote Damn Yankees and another very big thing for Broadway. And Shirley MacLaine was very close to Chris Adler. Brilliant young guy. Became a really good friend. And Chris said to me, you know something? Shirley is doing her 50th birthday show on Broadway called Life is Just a Bowl of Cherries. Why don't you go and write jokes? I'll convince Shirley that you're the right one. So I go to New York, and Shirley's in previews for 30 days, and I'm sitting there with, what's his name? Bruce.
Bruce Vilanch?
Yes. Writing jokes. And every night of the previews, I go into the bathroom and I faint. And Shirley comes in to pick me off the cold tile floor. And I said to her, I have AIDS and I'm going to die. And she says, you don't have AIDS. You have a fucking lactose intolerance. And this was before lactose intolerance was popular in the culture. I said, how do you know? She said, because you keep on eating these fucking cheese sandwiches. Okay. So I call up Ashley Lipschitz. I say, Ashley, Shirley MacLaine here tells me that I don't have AIDS, that I have a lactose intolerance. I said, what should I do? Well, when did Miss MacLaine go to medical school? Before, she's before or after Chorus Girls School, he said to me. So I said,
and this is when she was well known also as a UFO and believer and enthusiast, right? So people probably didn't think that she was like a great authority.
So I said, what should I do? He said, stop eating the dairy and see what happens. So I stopped eating dairy, and it goes away. And I was in New York at my apartment on 3rd Avenue and 9th Street that I owned. And it was a hot August day. And I remember there was a Good Humor truck on the corner. And I said, what the fuck does Shirley know? What does Dr. Lipschitz know? I'm going to get myself a fucking Good Humor bar. And I got the Good Humor bar and I ate it. 45 minutes later, out. Now, I didn't get tested until 1987. Arnie Klein said to me in 1985, I don't want you tested. He was a good friend of mine.
Arnie, he's Michael Jackson's doctor.
Right. But he was a good friend of mine because we both went to medical school at the same time.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. And he was a great guy. And we were a really good friend. And I
remember there were a bunch of conspiracy theories that Arnold Klein was the actual biological father of Michael's kids. And I remember his son Prince actually looks a lot like Arnie.
I don't know. Who
Wasn't
knows?
that one of the theories that he inseminated or fucked Debbie Rowe? No? Okay.
Debbie Rowe.
All right.
I knew Debbie
Rowe
very well. I don't know. I really don't know. At any rate, so Arnie became a good friend. So Arnie says to me, I don't want you taking the test because you will not be able to take it psychologically if you are HIV positive. I'll tell you when you're ready. And in 1987, one day I was in his office and he says to me, and I'm talking to him, he says, okay, you're ready. And he took me by the hand. We went across the street to take the test, Quest Diagnostics. I took the test. They said, it'll take 2 weeks. I'm sitting in my office. I was at Sandy Gallen. And my lawyer, Charlie Silverberg, was in the office, a big, tall guy who was the head of a big law firm. Very elegant guy. And I told my secretary not to interrupt me. Well, I'm sitting there talking to Charlie. All of a sudden, my secretary comes in. Arnie's on the phone. I said, Charlie, I have to take this. Arnie gets on the phone. You're HIV negative. And I jumped up and I went to Charlie and I danced around him. And I said, I'm HIV negative. This is so great. And he starts to cry. I said, what's the matter? He said, my son just told me that he has AIDS. That's my AIDS story. But, you know, I started Project Angel Food with Marianne Williamson here, which is a Meals on Wheels for HIV. Now it's for all terminal illnesses. And 2 months ago, we sold off 15 We served our 15 millionth meal.
That's amazing. You know,
It
I
is
saw actually that you had. Are you now friends again with Marianne Williamson? Because I saw an old Los Angeles Times story when you had.
We had a fight.
When you had a fight. How did she piss you off?
I don't remember. I don't want to talk about it. But
All right.
you know, we went to a psychiatrist to clear up our relationship, and now we're very
Seriously?
close. Yeah, seriously.
Huh. So Howard, you did go to med school initially, right? Did you
Yes.
did you go for a full year?
I went for 3 years. I wanted to be a plastic surgeon, so I would have had 7 years, a 5-year surgery residency, and then another 3-year plastic surgery residency. It's a long time.
Why plastic surgery?
You know, I'm a storyteller, and stories are about transformation. You start out angry and you end up not angry. You start out greedy and you end up not greedy. Well, the plastic surgery is about transformation. You take a person with a hook nose and you make it straight. And you take a person with small tits and you give them bigger tits. You take a person with no chin and you give them a chin.
Yeah.
It transforms your life. I was very into that thing of transformation. I still am.
So how did you get detoured from that? What happened? Why did you not become a doctor?
Okay. In 1967, May 5th of 1967, Nasser blockaded the Straits of Tiran, which didn't allow ships to go up to Eilat to feed Israel. It was a casus belli. It was a cause of war. Okay? May 5th. Israel begged the United States to stop this blockade, and they didn't. Okay? And Israel, the ethos of Israel is, okay, we're going to go it alone.
Yeah.
And they went alone. Now, I went to Israel 2 weeks before June 5th. I went against my parents' objections to volunteer, called Mitnadev. And they needed medics, okay, because they felt that if they went to war, there was going to be a lot of death. And they're going to need a lot of medics. At any rate, they placed me in at the southern end of the Gaza Strip in a place called Rafiach, and I worked for 6 days in a tent-field hospital, mostly dealing with Arab wounds.
Really?
Mostly, yes, because they captured a lot of Arabs.
Right.
Egyptians. The war's over, and they transferred me to the Hadassah Hospital, which is on the outskirts of Jerusalem and Ein Kerem, to finish my thing, because there was still a lot of people wounded. So I'm there. 30 days after the war, the great composer-conductor Leonard Bernstein comes to Israel to celebrate the return of the Jews to Zion, conducting Mahler's Resurrection Symphony on the newly reconquered Mount Scopus. And he comes to visit the volunteers. Lenny was a big Zionist. He did the same thing in 48. He had an Israeli boyfriend for many years. He spoke fluent Hebrew. I spoke Hebrew with Lenny, you know. And so Lenny sees me, the maestro sees me, and I'm standing in my whites with the stethoscope hanging out of my pocket, blood-stained white pants. And he comes over to me, he says, "Oh my God, you look just like this guy that I know who's my waiter at a discotheque in New York." And I answered in Hebrew, "Maestro, I was your waiter." Whereupon he kisses me on the lips and invites me to the concert. I took my cousin Rachel. And we, at the end of after the concert was over, there was a party at the King David Hotel. And I'm talking to Lenny. And guess what happens? And 2 days later...
Wait. What do you mean, guess what? What happens?
Right.
So you begin an affair with the maestro, correct?
Whatever.
Of course, your eyes danced a little bit. Okay, so you're not going to actually specifically kiss and tell, but okay, I got you. All right. Yes, please.
So I get very, very close to him, and he asks me to be his assistant on a documentary that they're making about him conducting the Israel Philharmonic Orchestra in the territories, what they call the West Bank. which we call Judea and Samaria. And I became his assistant. And he would say, you should leave medical school and go into the arts. You're a great storyteller. You will never bow to the mistress of science, he says to me. And I don't know what he's talking about. He takes me on vacation with his wife and 3 children to Italy. I come back to Hahnemann, to Philadelphia, which is now Drexel, in the fall, in September of 1967. And I'm finishing my last year. I'm assisting on an amputation. And all of a sudden, I hear the maestro saying to me, you'll never bow to the mistress of science. And I decided, okay, I'll take a leave of absence. And I come to New York, and I say to the maestro, I listened to your advice. He said, I'm married, as you know, with 3 kids, but I'll introduce you to 2 of my best friends. So he introduces me to Katherine Hepburn, who's doing a musical about Coco Chanel that Alan J. Lerner has written the lyrics for.
What year is this?
1968.
Okay.
Late 1968, he introduced me to Katherine Hepburn. The show went on in 1969, I think. And then he introduced me to Stephen Sondheim.
Yeah. And Sondheim, you developed a close relationship that you don't seem to want to get too in-depth on in past interviews, but, you know, Sondheim became a very close friend, correct?
Yes. I had an affair with Sondheim.
Yeah. Yes.
I was with him when he wrote Company, Follies, and Sweeney Todd, arguably his best work.
Wow. Do you feel like any part of that? Do you feel like, were you amused at all?
Amused? Oh, I don't know. I don't think I was amused. I don't know. Who knows? He loved my mind, Sondheim. That's what he loved.
Sweeney Todd might be my favorite of all of his.
Yeah, the greatest. Stephen was the greatest.
Leonard Bernstein was married. His wife was very aware.
Very aware. And I was friendly with his wife, Felicia.
So tell me the psychology of a woman who is willing to be married to a gay man.
You know, Lenny and Felicia met in 1945. She was Chilean, an actress, beautifully coiffed, beautiful nails, just divine. And she spoke 8 languages at dinner. She would go from Russian to English to French to Portuguese to Spanish to German to Italian in one dinner. It was mind-boggling. It was amazing. Lenny would travel with an entourage of very good-looking boys and very good-looking girls. No one knew. But when Lenny met Felicia in 1945, they had a remarkably hot sexual relationship.
Really? Okay.
Yes, for months. He was in love with her. She was in love with him. It was very, very sexual. Then Lenny realizes, well, I'm gay, okay? And he tells us to Felicia. Okay, and she goes back to Chile with a tail between her legs. And she writes to him a letter, very famous letter. I'm in love with you. I want to marry you. I want to have your children. Just promise me one thing. You'll never embarrass me in public. So what she was saying to him was, I want to have a relationship with you. Obviously, Lenny was able to have sex with women. As men, I had sex with a lot of women. Many, 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 many. Okay? To prove to myself that I wasn't gay from 18 to 21.
Oh, no shit. Well, I know you had a relationship with Howard Hawks' daughter, right, Kitty?
Yeah, right. She's still my best friend.
Oh,
Kitty.
really?
I speak to her constantly, yes.
Yeah.
I go to see, I just saw her at her house in Chappaqua. She's the greatest. Were
you successful? I mean, that's the thing that's so interesting to me is I don't know, I've never had sex with a guy, I will admit, and I don't know if I would be able to get it up. I mean, were you able to, you were fully functional with women?
Number one, when you're in your 20s and your hormones are raging, you just do it with anything, with anybody.
Yeah.
I mean, preferably, like me, I preferred men, but I had a very complete relationship with Kitty, very.
Yeah.
And I had many, 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 through the years, I've had sex with women a lot. Through the years,
When did you stop? When's the last time you had sex with a woman?
Oh, like mid-'80s.
Okay. Wow. You really did. Well, that's amazing. And you said initially that you were sort of trying to convince yourself that you weren't gay up through the mid-'80s?
Well, no.
Yeah.
No. From 18 to 20. Well, what happened was when I was 4, my parents knew I was gay. I went to this yeshiva called Highlight, the Hebrew Institute of Long Island, and I had sex with every man in my class. Okay, jerking off, stuff like that.
Yeah,
vanilla stuff, easy stuff, not penetrative sex.
Every kid,
every male.
Holy shit! How did you? You must have been. I assume they were all willing.
Well, everybody.
Very,
in those days,
very charming.
In those days, you're experimenting.
Yeah.
So you're trying to find out about it. And your hormones are raging.
Yeah.
I still get calls today.
Saying what?
From grandfathers who remembered having sex with me.
And did they want reparations? Did they want money? Or are they like, wasn't that fantastic?
From the time I was bar mitzvahed until I was 18, it was not cool to be gay in Far Rockaway or anywhere in 1958. It was so not cool. Mm-hmm. So I shut down my sexuality from the time I was 13 till the time I was 18. And then when I was 18, I wanted to prove that I was straight. So I fucked a whole series of girls, many, many, many girls, to prove that I was straight. But I wasn't straight.
We'll get into this more, but I mean, I feel like there are shades of...
Well, then it's funny. Then I met all those people from West Side Story, and then I met Kitty. I also had an affair. Okay,
so you became... you also had an affair with who?
Edward Albee.
Really?
Yes.
Was it a long-term affair?
No, not long. About 3 or 4 months. 5 months. I watched the moon landing with him. I wrote my thesis in college. I went to Brooklyn College. And I wrote my thesis on the influence of Strindberg on Albee. It's after he wrote the Zoo Story in Act 1.
Yeah.
I was obsessed with Edward Albee. I used to pass his house on 11th Street, and in his garage, he had the house from Tiny Alice. So I come to New York in 1967. It was very early on in my stay in New York, and I couldn't handle liquor, okay? So I'm at a bar called Julius's in New York that's still around, and I'm drunk out of my fucking mind. And I dragged someone home. I had a little apartment on 64th between Madison and Park, a walk-up apartment.
Nice neighborhood.
But the only bad building in the neighborhood that wasn't kept up. And I take this person home. And when I wake up in the morning, I look over, and who is it? Edward Albee.
No shit. You were that drunk that you didn't realize that you always wanted to meet him, and then you...
At any rate, he was living with Terrence McNally at the time.
And I didn't realize they'd been involved.
And Edward convinced me to go back to medical school. I went back to medical school. I was offered a place in the 4th year class.
Now, this is after you had been Katherine Hepburn's assistant?
Yep.
Was that a good job, by the way? Being Katherine Hepburn's assistant, was she a difficult person to be a personal assistant?
Not to me.
No.
My first interview with her was like this. Lenny introduces me to her. I come to her house. She was living next door to Stephen Sondheim at 249 East, what street? 48th Street, 49th Street? At any rate, she's living there. I come in, I sit down, and she says to me like this, "Are you tardy or on time?" I said, "I'm on time." "Okay," she said, "you're hired." It was the time that she won the Oscar with Barbra Streisand for A Lion in Winter. That's when I was her assistant.
See, one thing that's sort of like confusing to me is your start in show business was with Joel Schumacher.
Yes.
But you guys co-wrote Sparkle,
right,
which was remade in 2012. But this was what, 1976?
No. We came up with the idea for Sparkle in the summer of 1970, 71 maybe. 70 or 71.
Okay, so
and I made Sparkle in 73. So Joel and I met...
See, here's what I want to ask. It's like two guys, he's a half Jew from that area. You're fully Jewish. This is a movie about like basically a Supremes like group in Harlem. Why was this the idea? Who came up with this idea, and why was this idea appealing to you guys?
I came up with the idea. We were obsessed me and Joel were both obsessed with Motown, with Diana Ross, with Marvin Gaye, with Tammy Terrell, with Smokey Robinson, with the Temptations, with the Shirelles.
Yeah.
We loved that music. Loved that music. I'm still stuck there, by the way. I haven't left that area musically.
Yeah.
Okay. I listened to that and Stephen Sondheim, and that's it. Joel used to design these windows at Bendel's, and they were events that the entire fashion world would come to see Joel doing these windows. And he would take 3 mannequins and he would twist them in such a way and put them in these dresses, and the windows turned out to be art pieces. And he would put them in red dresses. And on one of the red dresses, there were all these paillettes, sparkling things. And one of the paillettes, a red paillette, fell to the floor, and the light fell on the paillette and it started to sparkle. And I walked over to Joel and I picked up the paillette and I put it into the light and I said, this is the movie that we should make about these 3 girls and call it Sparkle.
Amazing.
That was amazing.
And how did you make it happen? I mean, neither one of you actually, you're telling me you got the Katherine Hepburn job through Leonard Bernstein, both recognizing something intellectually and physically in you. I mean, do you feel like having these romantic relationships with all these important people benefited you in terms of getting stuff off the ground, or is it totally, I don't know what a producer does. Maybe you can tell me if that.
The answer is yes.
Okay.
It helps if you're attractive in Hollywood.
I wouldn't know. I would never know. I wish. It's one of my great wishes.
I was cute when I was a kid. I was a good-looking young guy. So was Joel. And both of us, we use our sexuality at the beginning of our careers to advance, You can only do that for so long because after a while you lose that, And so you have to be able to deliver the goods without all of that.
Did you guys ever have a relationship or physical relationship? Small one.
But our relationship was not about that. Our relationship was about something else. Although Joel wanted it to be about that. I didn't. When I fell in love with Kitty, it was hard for Joel. Joel was in love with me. I was in love with Kitty. What could you do? And so Joel got angry and moved to California. I came out after him. I broke it up with Kitty. In the meantime, Joel and I came up with the story together of Sparkle, and then I wrote a treatment. And then one night, this is a funny story that I've never told before. I went to some dance emporium in New York and picked up some guy. The next thing I know, I wake up at 135 Central Park West. It was a place that Peter Brown, who now represents The Crown, by the way, and Andrew Lloyd Webber.
The Crown, the show, or the
Crown? The Crown.
The Crown. What do you? Okay, the Crown.
The royal family,
like the firm. He represents. Okay, all right.
He's a Brit who used to be Brian Epstein's assistant.
Yes.
And then worked for Stigwood and RSO Films. And so I picked up this guy, and I wake up at 135 Central Park West. And the guy that I picked up, his name was Tommy Nutter, who was a clothes designer who was famous for making piping on the jackets that he made for Mick and Bianca Jagger. I didn't know who the fuck he was, but he says at breakfast, tell Peter the story that you told me about the 3 girls in the red dresses. Okay. So I tell him the story. So Peter Brown buys it. Gives me and Joel $5,000 for the treatment. It's Robert Stigwood, the great entrepreneur who represents Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice. And
I'm sorry, I got lost. Was Stigwood the one you woke up with?
No. I woke up in the apartment that Stigwood owned that was the headquarters of RSO Records that Peter Brown ran.
Gotcha. Because Stigwood loved boys, right? Stigwood was like yes. And you would work for Stigwood eventually, correct?
Eventually, through Peter Brown. It happened all because of Peter Brown. Because Stigwood paid the money. I had to get involved with the RSO organization.
Stigwood, unfortunately, unlike you, was not beautiful. when he was
the ugliest thing that ever walked the face of the earth. Beyond ugly.
Did you have to? I mean, did
no?
Okay,
I never did that. If
Okay.
someone was ugly, I would never, or I thought was ugly.
Good for you. Standards. I like that. Okay.
No. I there were certain things that I was attracted to, and certain things that I'm not.
Yeah.
Who knows? They're the most beautiful guys in the world that I'm not attracted to. The most beautiful.
Yeah.
Young ones. I don't like them young.
Oh, speaking of, what do you think of the casting of Bradley Cooper as Leonard Bernstein?
Bradley's brilliant.
What was that long? What am I supposed to read from that long pause, Howard? I don't understand. Like that was like there's like this. I could write a million words about that pause. You're not into that. You're not into that casting, huh?
Oh, I think
What
he's
does he
going to
know-
do a brilliant job. I think he's going to do a brilliant job.
This is about Bradley more than this is. You're giving me a sort of a.
No,
I'm trying
it's that I wanted to make the Leonard Bernstein movie.
Oh, so you're pissed about it. I'm sorry. I didn't know that.
You can't figure it out?
Well, I
How
figured it
smart
out.
are you?
I step
At any rate, I also feel he's the most Jewish man in the world. Why would you pick a guy to play?
That's what I was looking for. Okay, I want to ask you actually about Call Me by Your Name. I was thinking about it, and I was thinking to myself, Howard, could you have made that movie if the Army Hammer character, who is supposed to be 26 or 27, had actually made the first move on the Timothée Chalamet character?
No.
Why not?
Because this wasn't a gay love story. What this was a first love story. That's why people like you and straight people can identify with it. It's a story of first love.
And there's also some pretty hot sex with Timothée
right.
Chalamet and that Italian girl.
Right.
Right?
And-
I mean, that
right.
I think was, yeah.
And if Army Hammer was the one that was going to make the first move, it wouldn't have worked. It would have been wrong. It would have been a wrong note, I think.
But do you think that a movie like that could get made, just couldn't get made? Because I feel like from the gay friends that I've talked to, the much more common scenario is the older guy will come on to the younger guy.
Right. And that's what was great about this. That Timothy was in love with him and chased him.
Right.
Until Army realized, that he had a thing for him. It was Timothy that put his hand on Army's dick. I don't know if you remember that scene. Okay.
Yes, I do remember that. I was thinking, well, maybe we have seen a coming of age movie where the older man puts the hand on the dick of the young man. Have we seen that? Will that movie ever get made by Hollywood?
No.
Did you have any issues making this film? Did you ever, one thing that a term that I hadn't heard before, and this is on sort of in a lot of the, it's not in a lot of it, but you go on Twitter and you see stuff like this saying that Timothée Chalamet was queer baiting, meaning he was portraying a gay character in order to. Do you understand queer baiting? In order to basically, as a career move and a very cynical move.
Right.
What do you think about that?
Timothy's not that at all. Not at all.
Do you know that term, queer baiting?
I know it very, very well.
Why?
Because young guys would come to my office who were actors, and they would bat their eyelashes, and they would think because I was gay that I was into them. And I would say to them like this, stop batting your fucking eyelashes. I'm not into kids like you. I'm into older guys, okay? Yeah. If you keep on doing that, I'll throw you out of my fucking office, and you're not going to get work that way.
Yeah.
I saw that a lot in my career. A lot.
So has this been known? Is this word queer baiting? Is this like a term that's been known for? Oh,
yeah.
It's new to me.
Well, you're straight.
Yeah. It's interesting because do you think that movie could have been made with gay actors? When you were casting, did you ever consider gay actors? It was funny because Hanks recently said, and I find this actually, I found him telling the New York Times that if Philadelphia were made again, it would have to be made with a gay actor because, the times have changed. And I thought, aren't fucking actors? Actors can't like anybody play anything?
In that scenario, he's right. But in Call Me By Your Name, it was serendipitous that these two guys were straight.
Why?
Because if they were gay actors, it would have become a gay movie. And it's not about gay romance, as I told you before. It's about first love.
Yeah.
And so that's what it's about, you know.
Yeah.
And
I mean, you're a movie producer. Was there ever a conversation where you were like, you know, first of all, let's not make this a gay. Let's not get this into the ghetto of gay movies. Let's make this a movie.
Luca was the driving force behind all that, you know.
And you know what's interesting? When I was talking to Joel, they had just started production on the Halston thing, and this kind of comes full circle with you. I said, "What do you think of Ewan McGregor as Halston?" And he was just long silence.
And the way they portrayed Joel was disgusting. It was so off, so wrong on every single level.
But you know how long it took? You know what? You know who he suggested? Can you guess who he suggested?
No.
He said, Armie Hammer.
Huh.
Makes sense, doesn't it?
Does make sense.
Anyway.
Armie, the greatest guy, the great guy. Such a tragedy.
Did you see that he's actually selling timeshares?
That's what they say. Who knows whether that's true?
It seems,
I don't think he's selling timeshares. I don't know.
You call it a tragedy. He was fantastic in that movie.
Fantastic.
And you know, one of the things that I love is that how he actually dances when he's dancing to the Psychedelic Furs. Is that how Armie Hammer actually dances?
Yeah, that's how Armie actually dances.
I loved it. And I mean, I'm a straight guy, but I found it actually quite sexy. Did you find him sexy?
He's not my type, Armie Hammer. I like him burly and masculine with beards, you know, like lumberjacks. That's what I like.
Yeah.
That are 49 years old. I like them, football players who are now in their 40s with a little belly like that.
So it doesn't sound like Timothée Chalamet was your thing either.
I love Timothée Chalamet. I think he's gorgeous, but not my thing. You know,
not your thing.
Thank God. I've been lucky that way, that it wasn't my thing, because it saved me from all that Me Too shit.
Tell me about that. Tell me more about that.
I don't like kids. I don't, you know, I think they're embryos and fetuses. I don't like them. And so
you mean like those sort of stuff that the reason we don't see any Bryan Singer movies? Is that what you're talking about?
Like that.
And who else did that take down?
Many. Many
whose names we don't even know?
Yeah. Well, many that I can't even think of at this point, but I know who they are. You know.
When you think of those cases, do you think that it was unfortunate or do you think that it was warranted? I mean, if we're talking about actual kids.
I don't think in the male thing it's quite as bad as Harvey Weinstein. You know what I'm saying? My friend Bruce Weber was brought down by that. Three models accused him. And I know Bruce really well. And he's not that way. I know Bruce since he's 18. Yeah. We met at Stephen Sondheim's, okay?
Yeah.
And Bruce is so not that way. He's so not a predator. He's the most gentle, poetic guy. Listen, and if you know you're going to be photographed by Bruce, he photographs the male form better than anybody that ever lived, okay?
Right.
You know that going in. These three boys sued Bruce. It turns out that they sent him 6 months before Polaroids of them frontally nude wanting Bruce to photograph them. And Nan, who's Bruce's partner, was going to go to trial with this. But the judge said to Nan and Bruce, in this atmosphere, you're never going to win, ever. Settle, or else it's going to cost you 100 times more.
Do you feel this way about a lot of the people who've been taken down by Me Too? I mean, do you feel
yes.
you know, I saw you on Charlie Rose. You seem to be friendly with Charlie Rose. Do you think that was unwarranted?
I think Charlie Rose probably wanted to fuck those girls. I don't think he raped them. He probably put his hand on them or probably put his hand on their ass, pinched them. Listen, you know, when I first
Can we agree about Harvey? Can everybody, is Harvey like, or do you think that that's also a gray area?
No. He was a predator.
You produced the remake of Father of the Bride in, I think it was 1991, correct?
Yes.
That's when that came out. And I wondered what you thought about this portrayal. This is a little sampling of Martin Short in that movie.
Master and Mrs. Banks and the lovely bride. Hello. Hello. I'm not going to go to Frank. Pleasure to meet you. Okay, please come with me and we'll talk all about our big day. The big day for the bride. Pamela.
So you have Franck. Martin Short's a straight actor playing, I guess that's sort of a variation. It's kind of a European version of the sissy, right? Obviously, I don't think that we would see a character like that or a character like Bronson Pinchot played in Beverly Hills Cop. They're sort of similar. What did you think? I mean, as a gay man to have that portrayal, are you cool with it? I mean, it's hilarious, obviously.
It was hilarious. And I didn't think gay straight. I thought imaginative, crazy person, whatever. Okay. Yeah. James Orr and Jim Cruikshank, who wrote the first draft, they created that character of Franck. Okay. I knew that character would make the movie go over the top. And Nancy Meyer and Chuck Shire, they wanted to cut him out. And they were cold at the time. And Diane Keaton was cold. And they wanted Diane Keaton. And I said to them, listen,
as in their careers were cold. They were not,
I'll get Jeffrey Katzenberg to approve Diane Keaton, but you have to keep in Franck. And they made that deal with me, and that's what happened.
No shit.
No shit.
So you're responsible for saving Franck.
Yes, I am responsible for saving Franck. And I never thought of him as gay or straight. I never even
really
crossed.
Okay. Were you really the head of Michael Jackson's film company?
Yeah.
At one point.
At one point.
Did he make any films? I know he always wanted to be. He wanted to, desperately, right, to be an actor.
Desperately wanted to do Phantom. He was desperate, and I was the head of his film company. Yes.
What did he have you? I mean, when you had conversations with Michael, what did he want you to do for him?
He wanted me to find a role that would be a star role, in a great piece of material, and I read a lot of material for him, many scripts.
Do you think there's anything that could have worked for him? I mean, he was becoming, by that point, he was peculiar, correct?
Beyond peculiar. He was a horror. He had that nose. He imagine that face on 60 feet of screen. It just can't work. He was a genius and brilliant.
Howard, you look fantastic. You've made movies that I've loved. You continue to make movies that I assume I'm going to love. You've had a tremendous career, and you've been so generous with your time. I can't thank you enough. I've really loved spending time with you.
My pleasure. I enjoyed it as well.
That's our show. If you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did, please tell 10,000 to 20,000 of your former lovers to subscribe, rate, and leave a nice review about my energetic and tender performance as a host. This show is produced by myself, Andrew Goldman, as well as Rob Heath, who recently confided in me that his lifelong sexual obsession with the stars of the Golden Girls has saved him from being Me Too'd. Stay away from my granny, Rob! Big thanks to Silver Fox editor Mayor Rashawn, and somewhat more indirectly, Mayor's mom, Eliza, a classmate and friend of Howard's at the Hebrew Institute of Long Island. I have to believe, had Mayor's mom not met Howard 60 years ago, we wouldn't today be wondering if Jane Goodall's chimps had to be shipped off to rehab. The Originals is, as always, a highly replaceable production.